I had just started my new job as a security guard at a large office building. My shift started at midnight and went until 8 a.m. It was a quiet job, and most of the time, I spent my nights watching the monitors that showed the different parts of the building. I was the only person in the building during my shift, which made things a bit eerie. The first few nights went by without incident, and I began to settle into the routine of the job. But on the fifth night, I noticed something strange on the monitor. One of the offices was lit up, even though no one was supposed to be in the building. I decided to investigate. As I made my way to the office, I felt a sense of unease. The building was completely silent, and the only sound was my own footsteps echoing off the walls. When I reached the office, I found that the door was locked. I tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. That's when I heard the sound of footsteps. They were coming from the other side of the door. I froze, not knowing what to do. The footsteps grew louder, and I could hear someone breathing heavily on the other side of the door. Suddenly, the door burst open, and a man rushed out. He was wearing a suit and tie, and he looked terrified. He ran past me without saying a word, and I could hear him running down the hallway. I stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Then I heard the sound of footsteps again, this time coming from behind me. I turned around and saw the same man standing there, staring at me with wide eyes. "Lock the door," he said, his voice trembling. "Lock the door, and don't let anyone in." I did as he said, quickly locking the door and pulling down the blinds. The man sat down in one of the chairs in the office and took a deep breath. "Thank you," he said, his voice still shaking. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been here." I asked him what had happened, but he didn't want to talk about it. He just sat there, staring off into space, lost in thought. For the rest of the night, I sat in the office with the man. We didn't say much, and the silence was only broken by the occasional sound of someone walking past the door. Every time that happened, the man would flinch, and I could see the fear in his eyes. As my shift came to an end, I got up to leave. The man thanked me again and wished me luck with the job. I left the office and made my way down the hallway. That's when I heard it. It was a sound that I will never forget. It was a low, guttural growl, like nothing I had ever heard before. I turned around, and I could see the man's office door shaking violently. The growling continued, growing louder and louder with each passing moment. I ran towards the door, my heart pounding in my chest. When I reached it, I could feel the growling reverberating through the door. I tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if something was holding it shut from the other side. That's when I heard a scream. It was the man's scream, and it was filled with terror and pain. I could hear him thrashing around inside the office, and I was in complete shock. I knew I had heard footsteps, but I couldn't find anyone. I searched every inch of the station, but there was no sign of anyone. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. I tried to brush it off and continue my work, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in my gut. As I sat there, I couldn't help but think about what had just happened. I tried to tell myself that I was just hearing things, that it was just my imagination getting the better of me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. Hours went by without any further incident, but the memory of the footsteps still lingered in my mind. When my shift finally ended, I couldn't leave the station fast enough. As I walked to my car, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I thought I was finally free from that terrible feeling of unease. But as I got into my car, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Someone was standing in the shadows, watching me. I couldn't make out their face, but I knew they were there. I quickly started my car and drove off as fast as I could. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The next night, I went back to work as usual. But this time, I was more cautious. I kept looking over my shoulder, making sure I wasn't being followed. I made sure to check every corner of the station before settling into my work. But the unease never left me. Every sound seemed louder, every shadow seemed darker. It was as if the station was alive with something that was watching me. I tried to tell myself that I was being paranoid, but I knew that wasn't the case. Then, just like the night before, I heard the footsteps. This time, they were louder and closer than ever before. I quickly got up from my desk and searched the station once again. But just like before, there was no sign of anyone. I knew then that something wasn't right. I couldn't explain the footsteps or the figure I had seen the night before. But I knew that I wasn't alone in that station. I started to do some research, trying to find out if anyone else had experienced something similar. What I found shocked me to my core. The station was built on the site of an old mental hospital. The hospital had been closed down after a series of strange incidents, including unexplained footsteps and sightings of shadowy figures. The hospital had been abandoned for years before the station was built on top of it. I knew then that I had to get out of there. I couldn't work in a place that was haunted by the ghosts of the past. I handed in my resignation that night and left the station for good. To this day, I still can't explain what happened to me in that station. But I know that it was something that I will never forget. The footsteps and the figure in the shadows will stay with me forever, a constant reminder of the horrors that can lurk in the darkness of the night. Now let's hop onto story number 2. But before I begin reading, make sure that you have subscribed to Mr. Scare for regular horror podcasts. I've been working the night shift at this gas station for a few months now, and I thought I'd gotten used to the eerie stillness of the early morning hours. But last night, something happened that shook me to my core. Around 3 a.m., a car pulled into the lot. I peered out the window, expecting to see some weary traveler in need of gas or snacks. But there was no one in the driver's seat. The car was idling, the headlights illuminating the pumps, but there was no one behind the wheel. I thought maybe the driver had hopped out for a smoke or to use the bathroom, but after a few minutes, there was still no sign of anyone. I debated calling the cops, but what would I say? There's a driverless car parked at my gas station? I decided to investigate myself. I stepped out into the chilly night air, my heart pounding in my chest. As I approached the car, I could see that the driver's side door was open. I peered inside, half expecting to see a ghostly figure behind the wheel, but there was no one there. My eyes scanned the interior, taking in the scattered fast food wrappers and empty water bottles. But then something caught my eye. A crumpled piece of paper on the passenger seat. I reached in and picked it up, my fingers shaking. It was a note. If you're reading this, it read, "It's too late. Don't look behind you." My heart racing, I turned to look back at the gas station. That's when I saw them. A pair of glowing eyes, staring at me from the shadows behind the pumps. I froze, unsure of what to do. But then the eyes moved closer, and I could see the outline of a figure emerging from the darkness. It was a person, or at least, it looked like one. But something about the way they moved was off, jerky and unnatural. I realized with a start that this person wasn't alive. They were a corpse, or something worse. And they were coming right for me. I bolted back into the gas station, slamming the door behind me. I could hear the thing outside, banging against the walls, trying to get in. I grabbed the phone and dialed 911, my voice shaking as I tried to explain what was happening. But then something else happened that made my blood run cold. The phone line went dead. I tried dialing again, but the phone wouldn't work. And then I heard a sound that chilled me to my core. A slow, deliberate tapping on the glass of the window. I turned around slowly, afraid of what I would see. And there it was, staring in at me with those same glowing eyes. I don't know what it was or where it came from, but I knew in that moment that I was in grave danger. I backed away from the window, heart pounding in my chest. And then, to my relief, I heard the sound of sirens in the distance. The thing outside seemed to sense it too, and it vanished into the darkness. When the police arrived, I told them what had happened. They searched the area, but they found no sign of the driver or the thing that had attacked me. They told me it was probably just some sick prank, but I knew better. I never worked the night shift at that gas station again. But sometimes, when I'm driving down a dark road at night, I can still see those glowing eyes staring at me from the shadows. I tried to calm myself down, but my hands were shaking. The fear was real, and I had no idea how to deal with it. I decided to check the cameras again, hoping that I could see something that could explain what was happening. As I looked at the screens, I saw something that made me scream. One of the cameras showed a dark figure standing right outside the entrance. It was tall and thin, with long arms and legs. Its face was hidden in shadows, but I could feel its eyes on me. I felt paralyzed with fear, unable to move or even breathe. The figure started to move, walking slowly towards the entrance. I could hear its footsteps echoing through the empty building. I knew I had to do something, but I had no idea what. I grabbed the phone and dialed 911, hoping that someone would pick up. But as I waited for a response, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It was the sound of the door unlocking. I could hear the figure walking towards me, its footsteps getting louder and louder. I knew I had to hide, so I quickly turned off all the lights and made my way to the back room. I locked the door and hid under the desk, hoping that the figure wouldn't find me. But it did. I could hear it breathing, its cold breath sending shivers down my spine. It started to scratch at the door, trying to get in. I knew that I was running out of time. I closed my eyes and started to pray, hoping that I would make it out alive. But as the scratching grew louder and more frantic, I knew that my time was up. The door burst open, and the figure stood before me. It was tall and thin, with long arms and legs. Its face was twisted in a grotesque smile, its eyes gleaming with malice. It reached out and grabbed me, pulling me towards it. I tried to fight back, but it was too strong. It pulled me closer and closer until I was face to face with it. Its breath was cold and foul, and I could feel its grip tightening around me. I knew that this was the end. I closed my eyes and waited for the inevitable. But then, I heard a sound that made me open them again. It was the sound of a police siren. The figure turned its head, distracted by the sound. I took my chance and ran towards the exit, pushing past it as I made my way outside. I ran towards the police car, my heart pounding in my chest. The police officers got out of the car, their guns drawn. They asked me what had happened, and I told them everything. They went inside to investigate, but they found nothing. To this day, I still don't know what that figure was or why it was after me. But I know one thing for sure, I will never work another night shift again. It was another dreary night at the gas station, where I worked the graveyard shift. The fluorescent lights flickered and hummed, casting an eerie glow throughout the small convenience store. I was the only one there, as usual, save for the occasional customer who stumbled in to buy cigarettes or a candy bar. But something was different tonight. As I stood behind the counter, idly browsing through Reddit on my phone, I felt a creeping sense of unease settle over me. It was like I was being watched, or like something was lurking just beyond my peripheral vision. I tried to shake off the feeling and focus on my phone, but the hairs on the back of my neck were standing up. It was then that I heard a sound from the back of the store, a soft rustling noise. I froze, listening intently. It sounded like someone was moving around in the stockroom. I grabbed the baseball bat we kept under the counter and cautiously made my way towards the back of the store. The stockroom was small and cramped, with boxes and crates piled haphazardly on shelves. As I peered into the dimly lit space, I saw something move in the shadows. My heart racing, I took a step forward, brandishing the bat. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. There was no response. I could feel my palms starting to sweat as I approached the source of the movement. It was then that I saw it, a dark figure crouched in the corner. I swung the bat, but it passed right through the figure as if it were made of smoke. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. I had heard stories about this place being haunted, but I had never believed them until now. The figure slowly rose to its feet, its features indistinct in the dim light. It seemed to be watching me, and I felt a sudden urge to flee. I turned and bolted towards the front of the store, slamming the door shut behind me. I stood there for a moment, trying to catch my breath. The figure was still in the back of the store, but I could hear it moving around, like it was searching for something. I realized with a start that it was trying to find a way out. I looked around for a phone, but the store's landline was dead and my cell phone had no signal. I was trapped, alone with the ghostly figure that seemed intent on doing me harm. As the night wore on, the figure grew more and more restless. It knocked over displays and sent boxes crashing to the floor. Its movements became more erratic, and I could hear its breathing growing louder and more labored. I was paralyzed with fear, unsure of what to do. But as the figure began to move towards the front of the store, I knew that I had to act. I grabbed the baseball bat and braced myself for impact as the figure burst through the door. But as it lunged towards me, I swung the bat with all my might, connecting with its formless body. There was a sudden flash of light, and the figure dissipated into the air. The store was silent once more, save for the sound of my ragged breathing. As the sun rose over the horizon, I knew that I had survived the night. But I also knew that I would never forget the horrors that I had witnessed, the ghostly figure that had haunted me throughout those long, dark hours. From that night on, I quit my job as a night shift worker at the gas station. I never spoke of the experience to anyone, but I knew that I would carry the memory with me for the rest of my days. It was another typical night shift at the factory. The humming of the machines and the occasional clang of metal filled the air. I was used to the monotony of the job, and I had learned to tune out the noise around me. But tonight was different. Tonight, I felt like I was being watched. It started with a strange feeling in my gut, like something was off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but the hairs on the back of my neck were standing on end. I tried to shake it off and focus on my work, but the feeling only grew stronger as the night went on. Around midnight, I decided to take a quick break and grab some water from the break room. As I walked down the dark hallway, I heard a faint whispering sound. At first, I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but the sound grew louder and more distinct with each step I took. I stopped in my tracks and listened closely. It was a voice, but it wasn't coming from any direction in particular. It seemed to be coming from all around me, whispering in a language I didn't understand. I tried to brush it off and tell myself it was just the machines playing tricks on me, but the feeling of unease only grew stronger. As I made my way back to my station, I noticed that the machines were running slower than usual. I walked up to the control panel and tried to troubleshoot the problem, but everything seemed to be in order. That's when I noticed a strange symbol etched onto the metal surface of the machine. It was a symbol I had never seen before, and it made my skin crawl. I rubbed my eyes and tried to focus on the task at hand, but the whispering grew louder and more insistent. It was like the voices were trying to tell me something, but I couldn't quite make out what it was. Suddenly, the machines began to shake violently, and sparks flew out from the control panel. I tried to shut down the machines, but the controls wouldn't respond. The whispering grew louder and more chaotic, and I realized with a sinking feeling that something was very wrong. As I looked around the factory floor, I saw something moving in the shadows. It was a figure, but it wasn't human. Its limbs were twisted and contorted, and its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light. I tried to run, but the figure was too fast. It chased me through the factory, its whispers echoing in my ears. I could feel its breath on the back of my neck, and I knew that it was only a matter of time before it caught me. But then, suddenly, the figure disappeared. The whispering stopped, and the machines fell silent. I was alone in the dark, my heart pounding in my chest. I stumbled out of the factory and into the cool night air, gasping for breath. As I looked back at the factory, I saw that the symbol on the control panel was now glowing with an eerie green light. It was then that I realized the truth: the machines weren't malfunctioning, they were alive. And they were hungry for blood. From that night on, I never went back to the factory. But sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night, I can still hear the whispering voices and the sound of metal grinding against metal. And I know that the machines are still out there, waiting for their next victim.